It's a brave new world. That's who I went with the title. And you saw those of you saw the image of the growing babies in labs. I think we've made progress that even Aldous Huxley could not even envision in his work, A Brave New World. And this class is where worlds are colliding, because as those of you who join us weekly know, we usually do a class called Ripped from the Headlines. As you can see, my favorite letter is R when it comes to classes. So in the summer, we do Remarkable Responsa. And in this class, the worlds are colliding because when looking at some of the responsa, and again, we've been looking at issues in rabbinic responsa that really in the last 100 years or so mostly have pivoted how we look at a number of different issues relating to, as we've seen so far, technology. We looked at issues relating to community dynamics in terms of last week, the non-observant Jews and idea of doing engagement in Kiruv. What we've seen are responses that have definitely pivoted us more quickly in a direction to embrace issues relating to that emerged differently. If you remember the electricity discussion, there never was a discussion about anything relating to electricity because there never was electricity. And they tried to fit it into previous categories, but as some of the sources showed, some of the rabbinic responses were that this is something very different, and it continues to evolve. Same thing with regards to how the idea of, there was always the idea of non-observant Jews, but a community full of non-observants was something that more contemporary society had to deal with in terms of how to engage the non-observant who wanted to still be part of an observant community but didn't want to observe. And so these are shifts of how to take some, as we always say, the age-old halachic sources and conversations and apply them in ways that really go beyond. And I think we see something similar with this Brave New World with regards to surrogacy and in vitro fertilization and pregnancy and parentage, which is a word, of who are considered parents. For those of you who remember each of our classes, we covered some of these discussions regarding specifically surrogacy back in 2022. I didn't remember. I have files for that. But we want to look at it from a little bit of a different perspective, in particular, where I think things pivoted really in the second half of the 20th century, in particular, with some of the responses of Moshe Feinstein and those who either agreed or took issue with his approach. And in particular, where the headlines, I think, meet up, had to do with something that just I saw last week. I don't know if anyone here subscribes to or reads articles from the Free Press, media outlet created by Barry Weiss. This is a headline: 1 embryo, 3 parents, the future is already here. Take a look at a piece from that article. In a heroic effort to prevent the transmission of disease from mother to child, researchers from the United Kingdom reported last week on the birth of 8 babies, each of whom was conceived from 1 sperm and 2 eggs. Although the babies thus far appear mostly healthy, some are wondering if science has taken a step too far. Will tinkering with nature like this have lasting consequences? Is the product of 3 distinct parents even human? The development of the procedure known as mitochondrial donation has proceeded cautiously over decades. The aim has not been to create hybrid creatures, but to prevent horrific disease linked to mitochondria and the microscopic power generators in the mother's egg. And so the article mentions just briefly how they do this. To avoid mitochondrial disease, then, the aim is to transfer the combination of mom and dad's DNA from a fertilized egg with sick mitochondria into an egg with healthy mitochondria stripped of its own DNA. So you're basically taking an egg that's completely stripped of any of the genetic materials, but has the mitochondria DNA, which is what allows the egg to grow. It sounds so simple. It sounds simple to me, right? But the story is a bit more complicated. It turns out that a baby's genes are not 50% from the father and 50% from the mother. Mitochondria is the mother's egg. In the mother's egg also contributes some DNA, less than 1%. This means that even if you remove the DNA from a donor's egg and inject new DNA into it, the maternal contribution to the offspring would still come from 2 women. This is how we arrive at a single embryo with 3 parents. Nearly half the DNA from dad, nearly half the DNA from mom, and less than 1% of DNA from the egg donor. some of you may, spoiler alert, when we talk about surrogacy, we talk about baby having two mommies, and we'll go into some of the text afterwards. Here we have, two mommies and one dad from the very beginning, from on a genetic level. So, you could envision all sorts of categories. First of all, how does that work? When we talk about Jewish percentages, we have an idea of Batul Barov, Batul Bashishim. How does this play out on those regards? So again, a brave new world. If we look at the next source, this came out earlier this month, and it's something that has been discussed in Israel for the last couple of years, but in particular after October 7th became relevant. Court said to approve mom's request to use fallen soldiers' son's sperm to have a grandchild. And a lot court has authorized Sharon Eisenkot. You know the name Eisenkot. Gadi Eisenkot was a former chief of staff, was part of the war cabinet, part of the Gantz party, recently started his own. And he had a son and a nephew. And this is his nephew. This case is about. IDF soldier Maor Eisenkot, who was killed in Gaza in 2023, to have a grandchild through surrogacy, according to Channel 12 report Saturday. This is the first such decision since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war, which erupted with Hamas at onslaught. Sergeant Maor Cohen Eisenkot, 19, was a combat soldier in Golani Brigade 12th Battalion. He was killed in Gaza Strip December 2023. The court based its ruling on testimony showing that Maor had clearly expressed his wish to have children and had agreed to the posthumous use of his sperm, even with a woman he did not know. Sharon Eisenkot only learned of his wishes after Maor was killed through a childhood friend to whom he had confided. Right, and you have to remember, sometimes the sperm is removed post-mortem, right? This case doesn't exactly go into that, but how does that work? It's a part of a person who's dead. Is that considered? Is there a link parentally from this or not? The halachic discussions, as far as I know, there have not yet been as much discussion of halachically of this case. As you can see, it's the first time it's been practically implemented. But we'll go back now and look at how some of this works. Now halacha has always, envisioned things beyond just the technology. So to start with this, the first cases where halachically the question was asked about how do you engage with, the let's call them out of the ordinary mechanisms of parentage, had to do with sperm donation. What would happen if you have a woman get pregnant from sperm outside of a sexual relation situation? And the Gemara very famously has a situation. What's the situation? Right, they talk about a woman getting pregnant from ambatya. She gets in a bath, and she goes in the bath, and there's sperm in the bath, and she sits in the bath, and the sperm goes into her womb and fertilizes the egg, and mazel tov. Right, so there's no sexual act, but there is a baby. Maybe this is kind of a Jewish version of the virgin birth. But the idea was envisioned. Even though it's probably biologically not possible. Correct. Well, exactly what. However, the idea of injecting sperm into a womb is not out of the ordinary anymore. More often now, we're more familiar with the whole idea of a test tube baby, where it's done outside. It gets more effective to fertilize the egg, and then you have to hope that it holds, and you can have the woman become pregnant. But this idea of injecting sperm was some of the first type of artificial insemination mechanisms for when there was infertility. In particular, there was a sense that you have a situation where the woman's not getting pregnant. Maybe it's the husband, maybe it's the husband's sperm, inject donor sperm. And the first cases, the first time we have this medically, scientifically be recorded, when do you think it was? Unless you know when it was. No, the Rav Moshe is dealing with it in 1959. When in society, seems that it was in the 1880s. They had this idea of injecting outside sperm. There's a case, a Philadelphia case. You could go, online and see, but that's the rest is history. Sperm donor, sperm banks, headlines of people with 1,000 kids, and they make Netflix documentaries of connecting to all those 1,000 kids. It's definitely, as the title we're saying tells us, a brave new world. But the concept was envisioned or imagined by Chazal already in the Talmud, and it's becoming something that's relevant already some 140, 50 years ago already, from a scientific perspective. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was dealing with the case in a responsa in 1959. That's source number 3. So, the situation is as we've been presenting, that there's a situation, how do you handle infertility? And the suggestion was to use sperm from someone else. So the question came to Rav Moshe Feinstein, source 3. So he's basically getting a question that came from a rabbinic colleague that was asked to the rabbi's wife because the woman was embarrassed to ask the rabbi the question. And he's saying, I wanted to, my delay in responding was because I wanted to discuss the medicine, the science of the issue. Right, and I spoke to my son-in-law, Rav Moshe David Tendler, right? Rabbi Tendler, who passed away a couple of years ago, was a famed Yeshiva University professor of Talmud and biology. He was Rav Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law. Masher mosifin lezera shal ish zemi zera ish acher shakorin booster. What they were sometimes doing was taking sperm from someone else, mixing it, or injecting both the husband's sperm and the outside sperm. And the idea being that they were concerned that the husband was infertile, but they would give additional sperm. They would give both. He says, "Rakin in Ramos lahashkid ruach bal hayisha sheyash shahavlad hu gam mizera shalom." He says basically they were injecting 2 sperms from the infertile husband and the sperm that they hoped would fertilize the egg. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says it's all fake because they're doing this so that the father feels better that he has participation in the parentage of the child, even though he's not. V'din zera acher. So now he says that was you asked about the whole booster situation. That's scientifically, that's just for the father to feel, the husband to feel good. But what about other seed, other sperm? Mafurish le'isur b'taz yardes b'kutzadi heshevim misham harabenu peretz bagas mak she'ish tzrich lizom nishkav asadinim sheshachav alem ish acher pentis aber mishichva zera shel acher. There's a Rabbeinu Peretz, one of the Tosafists, medieval 12th, 13th century, who points out that a woman shouldn't sleep on used sheets that were used by another man. Maybe she'll become pregnant from any semen on those sheets, and you have to be concerned about that. He says that you have to be concerned about pregnancy that comes even if there's no sexual relationship with another man. If the seed comes from another man, there's a problem. But how does Rav Moshe Feinstein get around this? Since you're concerned about the lineage, right? If you don't, you may, if it comes from outside sperm and you're not sure who the parent is, the father is, who knows? Maybe this child will marry their half sister or half brother. You'll have half siblings married. Since that's the only concern, yesh lahatir bezera shel nochri. If it's a non-Jewish sperm donor, it's okay. Since the child will be Jewish because the mother is Jewish, there's no relationship with the father, the non-Jewish father. Even if they had a woman who comes pregnant from a non-Jewish, right? A Jewish woman marries a non-Jewish guy, that the father has nothing to do with anything. Certainly when there's no sexual relationship, and Rav Moshe invokes the Talmudic term that injecting sperm from another person is like the Ambati case in the Gemara. He's not, so if you have non-Jewish sperm, Rav Moshe says it's not an issue. If there's a pressing need and they're desperate to have children, you can use non-Jewish sperm. So this is Rav Moshe approaching the issue 1959. Rav Moshe gets a lot of pushback. And he writes about that pushback in source number 4. You see, this is 1962. It's a few years later when the response was written. Kabalti michtavoha aruch ma'od hamalei divrei tochacha al kol gedusav amash lefi dato nidbelo shechuvasi al yigrumu eze pirtza betahara kedushas yichus klal Yisrael. you're concerned that I'm violating the sanctity of the paternity of the hereditary of the chain of yichus of Klal Yisrael. He's like, that's not the case. This is just the Torah. But Irur shall quote Torah al zeba mehashkafa sheba miyedias deas chitzonish shemivli mesim mashpim afal hadol mechach malav mitzvah Hashem yisrach tosein akdosho fi yosef deas haniz anich zavos Hashem yizem mishapkin chas shama aser lemuter muter aser parim shlo kalachu. He says any objection you have is alien, is foreign, is being influenced by outside ideas. That it's strange. That leads people to say that what's permitted is forbidden, and what's forbidden is permitted. Basically, this is kind of like rabbinic. You don't know what you're talking about. And Ramosha stands very strongly by his permissive ruling. He says any type of problematic, forbidden outcome is only when there's a forbidden sexual relationship. And if you don't have a forbidden sexual relationship, you don't have a prohibition. He says basically it doesn't have to be someone who's necessarily talking about a woman who on the female fertility issue. He basically says he's not saying this is something to advertise and promote as an alternative to regular child rearing, but he says there's no prohibition. Next, you have Ramosha continues to revisit the issue. This is revisiting it 20 years after that, 1981, source number 5. He's talking about Zera Nachri and Zrika Zera Habal. By now, it has developed more. It's now we're moving away from injecting sperm to IVF, because that's usually what they do when they're talking about the husband's sperm, right? Because if the husband is fertile, why would you have to inject his sperm unless you have an issue with the egg or the woman? It's female infertility that they're trying to overcome, and that's why they're using the husband's sperm, and they're doing it differently. He references his earlier response. Basically, what I said before, there's absolutely no problem, no reason to back away from from donating sperm, certainly from a non-Jew. He says, look, this is not something that the husband is not connected to this. So, this is not something that is ideal, because you don't have you're removing yourself from the midst of Puruvu. You'll have children. It's children that are being born in a different manner. Remember, the woman is not obligated in Puruvu. The husband has a problem with Puruvu, and if the husband is sterile, then you're removed from the idea of Puruvu, and so it's a meta halachic decision. It's a family decision. It's an emotional decision. It's not so much a mitzvah decision. Right? You have to remember. Think about Sarah giving Hagar to Avraham, and then Sarah gets jealous. So here, Ruvain and Sarah, and Ruvain is not able to have children, and someone else's child technically. So he says it's not an Eitzah Tova. Right? He says that people have argued with me, and I haven't published all of the correspondence. Right? I'm not interested in keeping the conversation going just to talk about the different arguments. Moshe says that he's like, look, I've talked about this a lot. There's no prohibition if there's no sexual relationship with another man. You're talking about the injection or the donation of sperm. I'm not saying this is a good thing. There's side issues. It's not the normal, but if there's a pressing reason, you can do it. And he's not even happy of using Jewish sperm per se. But if you did it, it's okay. He's like, there's no, you can't prohibit that which is permitted. He's saying it's problematic for all sorts of reasons, but you can't say that it's prohibited. And if you have a Kohen and a Jewish woman, and the Kohen's sperm is donated, and you have the child is born that way. The child is a regular child, and everything is straightforward. And if the girl could marry a Kohen, seems as if the boy would be a Kohen. So that's the Rav Moshe Feinstein, permissive, not encouraging it. Again, this issue has evolved significantly from the 1880s experimental cases to the 1950s early scientifically cases. Right, there are all sorts of situations that we have heard about. Sometimes we encounter situations where the doctors themselves were the sperm donors. Sometimes they didn't tell the mothers. There are all sorts of twists and turns the issue could take, but Rav Moshe is more permissive. Now, Rav Moshe references some who were opposed. Those who include, for example, Rav Yitzchak Weiss, the Minchas Yitzchak, who has a tshuva source number 6, where he quotes from the Satmar Rebbe. That is very, when talking about this, he says, I received about how it's very important to promote separating people, lafrushe me isura rabba. This is a terrible violation, as the Satmar Rebbe points out. And hazra'a melachotit, right? Artificial insemination that the doctors have. Another person's sperm because of all the prohibitions, right? People's hair should stand up. Could you even possibly permit such a thing? Right, and because he's writing to someone who is promoting the prohibitions or the restrictive views of the Satmar Rebbe and others. You have to save people from making a mistake in this. You're 100% correct, right? And therefore, Torah's emes yivakshu kikatru, right? Similarly, Rav Moshe said his view is Torah's emes, the permissive view, and now the restrictive view is now Torah's emes in the eyes of the forbidders.
When did you say he wrote?
So this is coming, I believe, he's quoting the Satmar Rebbe. He's probably quoting, before. This is like the Divrei Yoel Satmar Rebbe, so before 1978. So this is more, sometime in between sources 4 and 5 in that period. And then he's also pointing out what you point. He's also, Rabbi Weiss is pleased that they are promoting the restricted view that this should never be done. But I also want to just point out a note to strengthen the halakhic arguments, Shemim Komo Sha'al Zeh Bana Yisod Divrei Hamatir, that those who permit this, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, Muchor Delo Kavase. It's actually the opposite. And so what's he talking about? Divrei Asmak B'Shein Rabbeinu Peretz. If you recall, in source number 3, Rav Moshe Feinstein quoted Rabbeinu Peretz, who says a woman can't sleep on sheets that were used by another lest she become impregnated. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein rejected that as a problem. Why? Because if it's non-Jewish sperm, it's okay. And Rabbi Weiss is pointing out that Rabbi Feinstein, he's not mentioning by name, uses Rabbeinu Peretz, and Rabbeinu Peretz actually says it's forbidden. Right? There's the same prohibition. Now, the Rabbeinu Peretz does not mention that. That's the restrictive views interpretation of Rabbeinu Peretz. Again, this is a machlokes about whether a particular source is problematic completely or opens up a possibility for a permissive view. And a lot of this, part of it depends on your viewpoint. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says that how can you have something that's prohibited from an arayos, a sexual perspective, if there's no sexual act? And you don't have to worry about who's the child's father if the father is a non-Jew. And you have those who take the restrictive presentation of Rabbeinu Peretz, says, you can never do it. And so you have how this is playing out in the responsa. Rabbi Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, Tzitz Eliezer, right? He says, I want to add to what was done here. Right, it's the Yeshmak on Rosh Hashanah. She says it's a problem. It's a married woman that's getting outside sperm, and maybe the sperm's coming from another married man. He's just he's put off by the whole situation. So you have here, the sperm donation situation as having been viewed as negative in the first place by some, but accepted as a necessity by others. So if you begin to play this back, what's happening now with the Eisenkot soldiers' sperm? How's that going to play out? From Moshe's view, you have a pathway towards utilizing that sperm. Again, we have to now talk about that sperm is going to have to not go to his wife because he doesn't have a wife. It's going to have to be a surrogate situation, and we'll pivot now to the surrogacy discussion. But without Rav Moshe, that sperm's not going anywhere from a halachic perspective. And we'll look at a little bit of analysis of the whole thing at the end, because these days, the halachic communal discussion is mostly about surrogacy, right? Because we're not usually talking about sperm donation. We're talking about IVF, in vitro, which means it's taking place in a test tube, right? And that whole concept was in the 70s, and it was much later, and they started doing it. Now that's the common situation. And in vitro, which could also be a surrogacy situation. Remember, in vitro could also be a woman's egg and the husband's sperm fertilized in a test tube and then implanted in the wife.
Right.
Right.
It's not uncommon.
Correct.
If there's some kind of genetic.
Correct. It could be genetic issue. Correct. They're trying to take out a problematic gene, right? That which is now, taken on steroids, the situation that we introduced in the beginning of this year. However, even that, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the idea of taking sperm from the outside and fertilizing, whether in the womb or outside the womb, requires that type of acknowledgement of the possibility. Right. And we'll see, some general approaches. However, so the IVF is a more straightforward understanding of the halachic permissibility if we're talking about the husband and the wife. Right. Sperm donation, we've seen big machlokas. Rav Moshe Feinstein provides a lane for permissiveness, others very much against. But I think, just in my own encounter with the communal issue as people come up with infertility, it's not about sperm donation as much anymore. They talk about people want to donate their sperm to save for later. How do you get that sperm without it being a violation of Hotzah Zera Levatala, right? You needlessly spilling the seed. You could say it's for a purpose later. Again, the situation with the soldiers, Israeli soldiers, makes this a Jewish issue, which will be a brave new world on that halachic front, as we saw, in source number 2, the article with Mayor Eisenkot. So let's pivot now into surrogacy. So just like the sages envisioned some form of sperm donation scenario with a woman getting pregnant by going into a bath, it seems that they envision some form of surrogacy. And it's a famous case that emerges from when Leah gives birth to Dinah. Right, very famously, source number 8, right? Leah's on a roll. Right, she just had her 6th son, and then she has a daughter. And everyone, all of the Mefarshim point out that usually it says Vatahar Vateled, Vatahar Vateled, Vatahar Vateled. She becomes pregnant, and then she gives birth. Here it just says she gave birth. And there is a famous midrash that it was that when Leah became pregnant, she became pregnant with a boy, was worried that she would then have a 7th son, which would limit her sister Rachel to 1 son. And she was protective of her sister's honor, wanted Rachel to have at least 2 sons, like Bilhah and Zilpah, the maidservants. So she davened that her fetus become a girl. That's Rashi's understanding. Now, everyone points out, though, that it doesn't say that she became pregnant. So the Torah on this pasuk, source number 9, quotes the idea of a midrash. Right? In this instance, the Torah fails to mention Leah was pregnant. Midrash explains the real pregnancy-producing Dinah should have commenced with Rachel, who was supposed to give birth to Dinah. However, Leah's sister prayed, asking Rachel should not become embarrassed by producing fewer sons in either of the maidservants. Right? That's the midrash even Rashi quotes. As a result of the prayer, not that the fetus became a girl, the embryo in Rachel's womb was transferred into Leah's womb. So here you have basically a pre-modern thinking of a surrogacy situation. Now, the Torah extends this to also teaching us something halachically, because later on, when it's listing the lineage of the Bnei Yisrael as they go down to Mitzrayim, it says among the offspring of Shmuel that Shmuel had a son named Shaul ben HaKananis, Saul, the son of the Canaanite. So Rashi there says that the Saul, the son of the Canaanite woman is Dinah. Dinah, who refused to leave Shechem after she was abducted because she said, I'm tainted goods, no one's going to marry me. Shimon promised to marry her, and then they had this child named Shaul. Now, if some of you are thinking, aren't they siblings? Yes, that is a problem. So some say, well, this was before the Torah was given, or you could say that it doesn't have to be the case. Right? There's ways to explain the situation. However, it's problematic. And the Torah picks up on this and says, Rashi explains the phenomenon as an allusion to this Shaul being a son of Dinah who had been raped by the Canaanite Shechem. If so, we're confronted with another difficulty. How could Shimon marry his sister by his own mother? Right? According to a midrash, the problem is resolved. It's presumed that Dinah's fetus grew predominantly in Rachel's womb. Right? If you go back to the previous source, Dinah started off as an embryo, as a fetus in Rachel's womb, was then transplanted somehow, miraculously or otherwise, into Leah's womb. And therefore, when Leah gave birth to Dinah, who's officially halachically the mother of Dinah? Rachel. So Dinah is only Shimon's half-sister, which is not a problem back in those days before there was a Jewish nation, before there was a Torah. So the Torah is envisioning, based on the Midrash, this idea of a fetus transplant. And also that who is the mother? The genetic mother is the mother, right? Because Dinah came out of Leah's womb, but she's Rachel's daughter because it's the genetic daughter of Rachel, right? Because when we talk about surrogacy, we usually talk about the egg, the sperm, and the womb. The egg is the genetic origin. The womb is the mother where it comes out of. And then the sperm, we don't care about the sperm. It's either going to be the father or somebody else and the like. So, but you do have this idea of a brave new world of starting to have, again, 3 parents involved in the situation. Now, from the get-go, especially, as surrogacy became something, more of a conversation, 70s, 80s, Rabbi Dr. Manuel Jacobowitz, who was the chief rabbi of the UK, also past rabbi, Fifth Avenue Synagogue, wrote about this in his book, Jewish Medical Ethics. To use another person as an incubator and then take from her the child she carried and delivered for her fee is a revolting degradation of maternity and affront to human dignity. He presents a view that's one side of the discussion, that it's just, basically you're taking a woman with a womb and making it the oven and then taking the child away, right? This can become problematic. If you want an example from popular culture, there's a show Friends, right, where Phoebe is the surrogate for her brother and sister-in-law's egg, has triplets, and right when she's about to give birth, says very quietly, I'm going to keep one. Right? It's a problem. There's ethical, moral issues that have to be addressed, emotional issues, and Rabbi Jacobowitz takes a more conservative, small c, restrictive view of the subject in general. However, how does it work? This whole idea that we're saying, let's say it's completely science fiction from the technology and the science of the times, of the Torah, of the Midrash. What were the rabbis thinking? So it seems that the rabbis actually did think about these ideas of parentage. And I think, usually, we'll go right to, usually look at the contemporary response or discussions, but I think it's important to look at how Chazal, our rabbis, looked at this idea of who is the parent. And one way we can look at this is from trying to ask the question and answer the question, when does life begin? And we know when does life begin is an important question on the whole abortion conversation. Halacha less so because of the Judaism's view towards abortion, which was another class that we've spoken about before, has some relevance to this medical halacha and the like. Sometimes interesting that those who are more permissive on abortion are more restrictive on IVF and surrogacy. It's kind of an interesting separate topic. But the idea of when does the life begin is important, because if life begins at conception, then the embryo is where the life, with the fertilization process. Okay, so where is that? Who are the parents of that process? So the genetic mother and the father. Is there enough? If life begins at birth, well, then who's the mother of in a surrogacy situation? The birth mother, the woman whose womb the baby comes out of. And it seems that the rabbis approach it from both sides in different situations. Sanhedrin 91b, source number 12. Story of Antoninus and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And the question was, from when is the soul placed in a person? Right? When is life? Well, life isn't about necessarily only biology, it's also about the soul. Is it from the moment of conception or from the moment of the formation of the embryo 40 days after conception? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to him, it's from the moment of the formation of the embryo. Antonina said to him, that's inconceivable. Is it possible that a piece of meat could stand for even 3 days without salt as a preservative? It would not rot. The embryo couldn't exist for 40 days without a soul. Rather, said Antoninus, the soul is placed in man from the moment of conception, fertilization. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, Antoninus taught me this matter, and there's a verse to support him. And your providence, Pikuda Secha, has preserved my spirit, that it's from the moment of Pekida, that the soul is preserved within a person. Basically, Antoninus taught Rabbi Yehuda the halacha that the person is creation from conception, and therefore, when the egg is fertilized, you have a mother, and therefore, the Torah, quoting this far-fetched midrash, is correct. Rachel is Dinah's mother, because Rachel is the egg, and fertilization took place with Rachel, and therefore was then planted into Leah, and so that's the case. Now, the rabbis also present the other possibility from a Gemara in Megillah. Right, so the Gemara in Megillah is talking about the pasuk in the book of Esther, where it says that Esther had no father or mother. Ein la av ein. Why do we need to be told in the continuation of the verse, and when her father and mother were dead, Mordechai took her for his own daughter? Right, it says she had no father and mother, and when her father and mother died. Why does it have to say when her father and mother died if she had no father and mother? Rav Acha said the repetition indicates that when her mother became pregnant with her, her father died. And when she gave birth to her, her mother died. So that she did not have a mother or a father for even a single day. But the rabbis say when she gave birth to her, her mother died. The mother is the mother at the moment of birth. If that's the case, then Rachel is the daughter of Leah, and the whole thing falls apart. So some want to use that midrash and Torah as a discussion to try and decide which is the true mother. Others reject it because this is a little bit of a sci-fi kind of midrash. It's conjecture. You don't learn it from these types of things. So and so in general, you have different approaches. Some say it's the genetic mother, some say it's the birth mother, and some say it's both. Source number 14, Rabbi Steinberg quoting Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rabbi Auerbach opposes Sarah good motherhood, a priori. He's against the idea, right? Similar to the way there were those who were opposed to sperm donation, there are those who were opposed to surrogacy. If, however, it was performed, okay, so let's say they didn't ask Rabbi Auerbach, but then afterwards you're coming and you want to know who's the mother. Both the genetic mother, the egg donor, and the birth mother are considered mothers for halachic purposes. If either the surrogate mother or the genetic mother is non-Jewish, the child must undergo full conversion to Judaism, even if the surrogate mother herself converted during the pregnancy. So so basically, Rabbi Auerbach has a very restrictive view and kind of looks at it really as having two mothers completely, and therefore, if either one of them is not Jewish, you have to do a conversion. For the most part, the chief rabbinate, in a halachic position in Israel, follows the genetic mother. Outside of Israel and America, for example, they usually will do a giyur l'chumra. Since you have two valid opinions to cover all the bases, do a conversion, but not like Rabbi Auerbach, that it's a full conversion. It's more of a to be sure kind of conversion. You generally would, take the child to mikveh early on, assuming the parents are raising the child Jewish, and then just move forward. It wouldn't make it a full conversion like they do if it's an adopted non-Jewish child, if they like. Questions, comments? A lot of Brave New World type of stuff here. Now, this idea, a opposing view to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is quoted by Rabbi Chaim Jachter from Rav Lichtenstein at Har Etzion, source 15. So they they're quoting, this is an oral decision of Rav Lichtenstein, so it's not found in a technically rabbinic responsa, but Rav Lichtenstein posted on the issue. A Kohen and his wife donated the sperm and egg cells to create an embryo that doctors then transformed into the womb of a non-Jewish surrogate mother. So pretty much a Jewish couple, dad's a Kohen, mother's Jewish, and they need a surrogate to carry the baby. Non-Jewish woman gave birth to triplets, a girl and two boys, and gave them back to the Jewish couple to raise, right? Not like Phoebe, who wanted to keep them. Rav Lichtenstein told Rav David to convert the babies out of a deference to those authorities who consider the non-Jewish woman to be their mother, right? He, as we said, Rav Lichtenstein, was sensitive to different opinions, so you have to do it to be sure. Nevertheless, he permitted the sons to be Kohanim, for he fundamentally believes they're considered descendants of the Jewish couple, not converts. So certainly he ruled the daughter can marry a Kohen. So you have a very convoluted situation here. You have these three children born from out of the womb of a surrogate mother who Rav Lichtenstein is recommending convert to be sure, but the two boys are Kohanim, and the girl can completely marry a Kohen, even though we normally say that a girl, a female convert, cannot marry a Kohen. So it's kind of, we talk about my father's a Kohen, my grandfather's a Kohen, I want to be a Kohen too. That's true, but also I'm a Kohen, I'm a convert that's a Kohen. And this, I think, is built upon, something that Rabbi Feinstein mentioned at the end of source number 5, that, basically when you have a situation of sperm donation and the sperm comes from a Kohen father, meaning even if it's not a natural birth process, it's still viewed as both parents are the parents genetically. Rabbi Tendler addressed this issue because I encountered that situation in my own rabbinate. And Rabbi Tendler basically said, we're not going to penalize the children because of the fact that the fertilization or their conception and birth happened outside of without a sexual encounter. Remember, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says the problems only arise when there's a foreign sexual encounter. Here you have father's sperm, mother's genes, born separately, from another mother. We're not going to. The halacha is not clear-cut enough, according to the Rav Lichtenstein and Rabbi Feinstein approach, to say that the non-Jewish surrogate contaminates the Jewishness of the family here. Rabbi Auerbach disagrees. Right? He says if either genetic mother surrogate or not Jewish, you need a full conversion. But here you have the more permissive view, which I think is a continuation of the Rabbi Feinstein legacy that we saw before. So just to add a postscript, which as it continues to evolve, so Rabbi Shlomo Brody, a great scholar who writes a lot on practical halacha. He's now head of an organization called Ematai that's dealing in particular with a lot of end-of-life situations, and it's also being brought into a lot of the October 7th conversation, or post-October 7th conversation, address the issue of should Israel allow posthumous sperm donation? Right, that was what we saw in source number 2 was permitted by the Israeli courts earlier this month. He was addressing the issue 3 years ago when the Knesset first permitted it. Knesset permitted it, had not been tried, and nor had it been adjudicated by the rabbinical courts. So Rabbi Brody, when the Knesset allowed for the concept, started talking what are the halachic concerns. So let's just take a look at some of them. Posthumous sperm retrieval is illegal in many Western countries, such as Germany, Italy, and Sweden. Some advocates see this as yet another area in which Israel will pioneer reproductive procedures. Others view this as a grave moral breach in which we're producing planned orphanhood for the sake of creating a living memorial to the deceased. The most prominent supporter of this line of thought was Rabbi Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, who argued that such a procedure is permissible if the deceased gave explicit permission, or we can safely assume he would have desired this. Meaning, if you think this would be good, he would have wanted it. While it may be sometimes difficult to know the desires of the deceased, one must take into account the natural human desire to have a legacy. Goldberg further argued that the default perspective of Jewish law is to permit an action unless it violates some clear prohibition. So he seems to be in favor. Again, think back to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who permitted sperm donation, pushed back on those who disagreed with him by saying they're being influenced by a viewpoint which is trying to forbid that which is permitted. So we see, the Rabbi Moshe Feinstein permissive approach continuing to reverberate, I believe, into Rabbi Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, allowing this procedure of posthumous sperm donation because there's this ultimate good of wanting there to be descendants. It sounds a little bit like Yibum, right? Assuming, right? It'll be an interesting question. What happens if it's his wife and the wife takes the sperm and has a child? Is it his child? I think, Rabbi Brody may raise that, but there's all sorts of questions that we probably haven't even thought of all. So that was Rabbi Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, clearly embracing this idea. If it's not forbidden, if it's not forbidden, we're not, we're not don't forbid it. Some figures, like Rabbi Yuval Sherlow, so our rabbinic group, have contended we can claim that the use of the sperm fulfills the witch hunts only if he previously approved this in a living will or the widow requests. You need more than just this is a greater good to continue the seed, to continue the line. You need the person to have indicated it explicitly, kind of part of your living will, or there has to be a widow. Take that back to the situation that we're dealing with in the case of Maor Eisenkot, and Rabbi Sherlow would prohibit it. Because how did Sharon Eisenkot know this was the case? She heard it from a friend. And there's no widow. So Rabbi Sherlow would seem to be against that case. Again, he wasn't necessarily asked, we don't know, but that's what he's saying. Those two are the only ones empowered to make such an intimate and personal decision. No one else, including the bereaved parents, have any rights to bring his child into the world. This approach, however, was rejected. There are those who feel that you don't need it to be as explicit by a range of figures, including Rabbis Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, Dov Lior, Nachum Rabinowitz, who offered a more fundamental moral objection. Right? There are those who reject this possibility from the get-go. While they're deeply sympathetic to the bereaved widow or parents, they contend that it is immoral to bring a child into the world knowing he or she will not have a biological father. However noble the intentions, it is not in the interest of the child or broader society to allow such a phenomenon. So you have those who, Knesset allowed it. You had some who are in favor of this, even seeing this as a potential extension of the Yibum concept. Again, not a halachic decision, but it's been discussed. Rabbi Goldberg seeming to embrace it's not forbidden, so we're not going to forbid it. Seems to take the Rav Moshe Feinstein approach, and is even saying this is a good, it's a moral good, a value to have it done. Rabbi Sherlow says you can't do it without explicit instructions from either the killed person themselves as a living will or from their widow. And then you have those who reject this outright, saying this is unnatural.
So this last opinion is more about the expressed desire of the potential parents than it is about the mechanics of fertilization.
So maybe to put the restrictive view of Rav Elyashiv, Rav Lior, Rav Rabinovich is beyond the external or technical halachic procedures or the scientific procedures and those relevant halachos. They're against this unnatural family dynamic. And the likelihood is, again, a separate subject. What about a woman freezing her eggs? Yeah. What about single motherhood by choice? Right? I would imagine these rabbinic voices would be opposed to that, because they seem to be upset. They seem to be bothered by there not being a father in the picture. Again, what would happen if if the widow remarried and want to have? There are all sorts of ways to complicate this, and that's why it's a brave new world, and that's why we probably haven't seen the last chapters written. But we see how this Chazal had envisioned something. I think certainly Rabbi Feinstein, in his response in the 50s, 60s, and 80s, pushed forward a permissive view that began to impact even on issues of IVF and surrogacy. Again, Rabbi Feinstein is not encouraging this, but it's not forbidden. You had those who were just slammed the door on it. You can't do it. They had a halachic argument, right? That Rabbeinu Peretz, how do you want to interpret it? And then, as things become more complicated, and again, on some level, IVF and surrogacy are less halachically problematic because you're dealing with the two parents to begin with, in terms of the sperm and the genetic material. The complication is the surrogate. For Rabbi Auerbach, too complicated, don't do it. If it's done, if either is not Jewish, you have to fully convert. You have others who see the surrogate as being less problematic, maybe using the Rachel Leah Dina precedent as some source material to go by. Others reject using that as anything. But again, I think the Rabbi Feinstein discussion of sperm donation in the 50s, 60s opens up the conversation to be more creative how we look at it. Like look at Rav Lichtenstein. Rav Lichtenstein says, I am a product of the mother's egg and the father's sperm. Why are they not my parents? Because I came out of another person's womb. And then you have Rabbi Auerbach who says that's unnatural, so it's going to be complicated. So stay tuned.
I think this Rabbi Jachter thing. I think did you use this on your last class?
Yes.
This looks familiar.
Yes. I use Rabbi Jachter. So Rabbi Brody is new on this. I try to always add some new material. All right. I hope everyone has a meaningful rest of the 9 days and Tisha B'Av and easy fast. And hopefully we will continue next week.
It's really interesting. And of course, there are genetic reasons why you want to